On behalf of the Division for Research Development, I would like to welcome you to this first session in our series on research integrity and ethics. This series forms part of our information program for the year. And if you've not seen the program yet, please have a look. It's been sent to everybody via our listserv, but you can also contact Whitney, and I'm sure Whitney, after this session, we will send the information to colleagues again. And I know Dr. Barsdorf, who will lead the session today, will also at the end of the session alert you to the rest of the series sessions that particularly focuses on research integrity and ethics. So as I said, this session will focus on integrity and ethics, and more specifically on the responsible conduct of research, and it will give you an overview of the Stellenbosch University research ethics structures and processes. And I would like to welcome Dr. Nicola Barsdorf. She's the director for the Office of Research Integrity. Hi, Nicola. So Nicola will facilitate this session today. And Nicola, without further ado, I would like to hand over to you to give you ample time to kick off. Thank you.
Nicola, you're still muted.
Thank you, Malene. I'm just trying to pull up my presentation, and I'm wondering if you're seeing my Outlook or my actual presentation.
There's the presentation is now up. You must just put it in view mode. Yeah, perfect.
Oh, right. Okay, so I'm very happy to be kicking off the series of research integrity and ethics presentations that the DRD has on offer as info sessions. And today I'm going to only take up about half an hour of your time to provide a brief overview of research integrity and ethics at Stellenbosch University, and also just to look briefly at current policies and structures at the university. And just to give an outline of what we'll talk through in the next half an hour, I'm going to start with what is research integrity and why it is important, and then move on to a bit about what is research misconduct, what are some of the drivers for research misconduct or questionable research practices, and then look very briefly at how we can foster integrity in research. I'll spend a bit of time on Stellenbosch University structures, policies, and procedures that are relevant to research integrity and ethics. And then just to end off, I've put together one slide which reflects the various speakers and presentations in our upcoming series of info sessions on research ethics. So what is research integrity? Simply, it is the active adherence to the ethical principles and professional standards that are essential for the responsible conduct of research. And when we talk about ethical principles and professional standards, we're generally referring to things like honesty, responsibility, trustworthiness, fairness, accountability, and in particular, a high regard for the scientific record. And I think since this is the intro to research integrity and ethics, I thought it might be helpful to try and tease apart what many people see the differences are. And this is not from the literature, it's from my own understanding of how we separate them out. But research ethics can generally be understood as referring to the ethical design of the protocol. And then, through that, the thoughtful application of research ethics principles, and then compliance with various local and international laws, regulations, and guidelines. And that is generally enacted through research ethics committee review. So when we are developing a research protocol and the plan is ready, we submit it to an ethics committee, and they will review that to see to which degree it is meeting those ethics principles or benchmarks, and whether the proposed work is going to work within local and international guidelines and laws. And then they will communicate with the applicant to either make changes or improvements to bring the research to meet those standards. Research integrity, on the other hand, is less about the protocol itself and more about the moral conduct of the investigator. And so through this sort of looking at things like moral sensitivity, virtuous behavior, and professional standards. And this is generally enacted through peer review. So once we are done with that ethics process and we move on to the independent work of trying to disseminate our research findings or publish, peer review then kicks into place. This also sort of, the peer review umbrella covers also, other forms of peer review, I guess, in the form of whistleblowing. So this is the one way that we are able to monitor, I guess, research integrity if one sees patterns of behavior in various environments or by various individuals. So why is research integrity important? And I guess at the bottom of it all is trust. And it's important because it's the basis for researchers' trust in each other. It's also the basis for researchers' trust in the research record. And knowing that research is done with integrity is also the base for society's trust in research evidence and expertise, or society's trust in the basic academic project, if you want to call it that. And I think it's quite obvious that trust in research is earned by being transparent. So those around us can see what we're doing. They're able to replicate those findings. But it's also earned by performing research that's relevant, either socially or locally, that's ethically sound and that's of a high quality. And I think what we see is when sloppy research and questionable research practices come into play, they can undermine that trust by your fellow researchers, they can undermine the trust in the research record, and undermine society's general trust in our ability to produce reliable results. And it can distort the evidence base. And I think we all know we disseminate research findings because we want to accumulate evidence to either inform decision-making and practice, in some cases to influence policy and government spending, and in many cases to determine what are going to be the future lines of research in this particular area. So if dubious research starts to distort the integrity of the evidence base, and we have, so for example, non-scientifically valid findings or findings that we look back at that need to be retracted, for example, it can also start to misinform policy and government spending in the direction of future research. And this is not something we want to allow to creep into the quality of our work. So what is research misconduct? And I guess in the traditional sense, it's been defined globally as three things: fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. And these three things can play themselves out either in proposing research, performing research, reviewing research, or in the reporting of research results. Fabrication simply is faking data, so making up data or results and recording or reporting them as if they are real. Falsification is what is commonly referred to as cooking the data. So in other words, manipulating either research materials, processes, equipment, or data without scientific justification. And then plagiarism, most of us are familiar with what this means. It's the use of one's own or someone else's work without adequate reference to the source. And so I guess when you look at research misconduct, it's a small occurrence, and we can look at it on a continuum or a spectrum of research conduct. And on the other end of the spectrum is responsible conduct of research, what we defined in earlier slides as this active adherence to ethical principles and professional standards. But in the middle, there are what have been labeled questionable research practices, and there are a range of these. And I guess what the literature has revealed is that these shady or questionable research practices are not actually that uncommon. So there are two relatively recent studies, one from 2009, which was a systematic review looking at how many scientists fabricate and falsify research, and one more recent study from last year in the Netherlands looking at the prevalence of questionable research practices and research misconduct. And from these studies, we can see that research misconduct was was pretty small, relatively speaking. 2 to 14% of individuals in an institution reported having been involved in research misconduct. So strictly speaking, falsification, fabrication, and plagiarism. But the number for questionable research practice was significantly higher. I mean, the proportion was somewhere between 33 and 50% between the two studies. And what this I think shows us, if we boil it down to simple numbers, is that it's not uncommon to see 1 in 3 scientists admitting to using questionable research practices. And this gives us a sense of how it can have a significant impact and distort the evidence base. When we're talking about questionable research practices, we're talking about things like poor data management, poor mentorship and supervision, perhaps salami slicing publications, poorly managing conflicts of interest, or just generally sloppy science or failure to follow accepted research procedures. Improper allocation of authorship also falls into this category of questionable research practices. And I guess it's interesting, but also informative to look at what drives research misconduct, right? So not because we want to say that it's acceptable in any way, but I think if we better understand what drives research misconduct or questionable research practices, then we are better equipped to put in measures that are appropriate to try and prevent it, or to try and incentivize researchers in a different direction. So what I've done for the slide is put together a list of factors that have been identified as drivers for research misconduct. And I've cited the studies at the bottom of the slide that the data came out of. But essentially, you can, if you want to, divide this quite crudely between those kind of drivers that fall into the category of, the virtuousness of an individual. So personal circumstance might drive it, individual psychology, maybe it's part of a larger pattern of social deviance, etc. Versus a category of drivers that I think points more to the research climate of the institution. So what kind of career pressures or incentives are in place in this institution? Are there institutional failures of oversight? How are they managing conflicts of interest? Are they providing sufficient training, etc.? I mean, it's not a perfectly neat classification. And when I look at poor mentoring and supervision, I think this particular driver could fall under either one of these two categories, but it gives us a good sense of where the incentives or where the drive for research misconduct is originating. And I think this then helps us to think about how we can foster research and foster integrity in research. And both, obviously, as I've said, as individual researchers, we need to think about how do I go about doing my research with more integrity or conducting responsible research. And also as research institutions like universities, funders, including journal editors. There are a lot of ways in which one can foster integrity in research, both institutionally and individually, and I've drawn 2 out for the purposes of this presentation. I think, one is obviously a grounding driver would be familiarity with codes and guidelines. And I've posted here a mishmash of sort of the central set of research integrity guidelines and codes that we have available to us. And I think if you're thinking about this and listening to this presentation as an individual researcher wanting to know or get more resources about research integrity, the 3 documents that you want to direct your attention to are the Singapore Statement on Research Integrity and the Montreal Statement on Research Integrity. Both of these sets of principles came out of a World Congress of Research Integrity, and they are broadly used across the globe and accepted as standards for research integrity. And then the third one, excuse me, is the Global Code of Conduct for Research in Resource-Poor Settings. And this particular code has been adopted and endorsed by our university. If we're looking at this from an institutional perspective, there are obviously other resources like the Hong Kong Principles, which also came out of a World Congress of Research Integrity and tried to provide universities and other research institutions with mechanisms for assessing researchers that push the assessment in the direction of of responsible conduct of research rather than focusing only on things like quantity of publication, etc. There are other resources, and I've put there a very recent Science article which points to a website where you can check on self-plagiarism, and it gives you nice guidelines on how you can appropriately recycle certain bits of your text without it being considered plagiarism or self-plagiarism. And so there are a lot of guidelines out there that can be very helpful when looking to push your work to a certain standard. The second one that I wanted to draw out for the purpose of the presentation is good mentorship and supervision. And, fostering integrity in research obviously requires improving the supervision of postgraduates towards responsible conduct of research. And I've pulled this quite fun pamphlet from the NIH on 5 qualities of good research mentors, but I wanted really to draw your attention to the piece at the bottom. This is the Office for Research Integrity at the NIH. So they conduct investigations of research misconduct, and they've found that in over 50% of the findings of research misconduct, these are postdocs, students, technicians, and research assistants. And I think, in the overview of the literature that I did for the purpose of the presentation, but just in my general experience too, we're seeing that poor supervision and mentorship is this sort of key driver for questionable research practices. And it's not, to be honest, it's not a very it's a very similar experience to what we've had at Stellenbosch. If I just sort of look personally back a bit historically in my role as research integrity officer and the conduct of investigations and ones preceded that, 4 out of the last 5 investigations have involved students. And this is not to say that students are particularly a particular group that are conducting bad science, but rather once we've dug deeper into these cases to see where was the source of this, we found in many of those instances that the student just wasn't receiving appropriate supervision or mentorship to conduct their research within national guidelines on ethics or within the benchmarks and principles of research integrity. And so at Stellenbosch, we're in the process of revising our research ethics policy, but the wording that is in there at the moment is trying to make the roles and responsibilities of supervisors and mentors, I think, a little bit more explicit. So knowing that they should be responsible for mentoring their students and modeling to their students responsible research practices, including making sure they're familiar with those national ethics guidance and regulations, but also that they're familiar with how the research ethics processes and requirements of our institution's research ethics committees work. And so I want to just move on from there to talk a little bit about what structures we have in place at Stellenbosch University, as well as some of the policies and procedures that are relevant to research integrity and ethics. And I'm merely going to provide an overview of this because, as we've mentioned, there will be a series of talks that go into a lot more detail in each of the categories. But I thought maybe just to start with a bit of an image on the structures that are supporting the promotion of responsible research at Stellenbosch University. We have a Senate Research Ethics Committee which reports directly to Senate, and we have 5 research ethics committees at the institution that report to the Senate Research Ethics Committee. So we have one REC for social, behavioral, and educational research, an REC for animal care and use, an REC for biological and environmental safety, and then 2 health research ethics committees. And these ethics committees are, of course, supported by ethics administration. We have an ethics office on the Stellenbosch campus and another ethics office in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, and supported by research integrity officers that are tasked with conducting the research integrity investigations. So a little bit, I guess, about each of our offices. The Office of Research Integrity and Ethics on Stellenbosch campus, with myself as the director. And then we have Mr. Winston Bucas, who's a research ethics coordinator for animal care and use and for biological and environmental safety. and Mrs. Clarissa Robertson, who's the Ethics Coordinator for Social, Behavioural and Education Research, and Mr. Aidan Williams, who is our Administrative Officer and our Research Ethics Help Desk. We're here to advise and to help and to chat and consult. I've put you, if you go onto the website, which is where I've snapped this screenshot of this picture from, you will be able to click in and send an email to either of us. I've also put the general Apply Ethics at Sun email there if you'd like to shoot us inquiries. But we really are an office that's there to support you as researchers in helping you make your way through the Research Ethics Committee review processes, and are also a resource for information and access to guidance. So we really are here to help. We have another team another ethics team in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, the Health Research Ethics Office, which is headed up by Prof. Blanche Pretorius. And I've also put Dr. Debbie Murray in there, who heads the undergraduate research office, because they have an undergraduate research ethics committee which operates as a subcommittee to the HREX. And if you're doing undergraduate research or honours research, this is the committee to which you should direct your applications. And our Health Research Ethics Office also has a host of very experienced ethics officers, and Mrs. Melody Shana, who's the coordinator for Health Research Ethics Committee 1, and Brightness Kumalo, who's the coordinator for Health Research Ethics Committee 2. And again, you know, you're welcome to contact any of us for inquiries. I've put the general Ethics at Sun email there too, and the location of this office. And again, a resource of really experienced and skilled persons who can assist you and consult about health research ethics. At the university, we have 3 policies, I guess, and 2 procedures that are directly related to research integrity and ethics. So we have our overall Stellenbosch University research policy, and all of these are available in the link that I've popped at the bottom there. And then a policy for responsible research conduct, and related to that, a procedure for investigating allegations of breaches of research norms, and then a separate policy on plagiarism, and a procedure for the investigation and management of allegations of plagiarism. How do we, as an institution, I guess, try to support research integrity? And I think it's in 2 ways. One is sort of proactive and the other is reactive. And I'm happy to say that we try to invest most of our energy and resources in promoting and fostering research integrity and responsible conduct of research. So, as I've mentioned already, there's advice and support available at all stages for all aspects of the research process. We provide training, such as these info sessions, but also other formal and informal training sessions in research ethics and integrity and publishing, plagiarism, ethics of using human participants, animals, biological safety. And so you can look out for those during the course of the year. And then policy and guideline development, obviously as a basis for reference and decision making and a route to move forward. And then we obviously have to have mechanisms in place to respond to allegations of research misconduct or breaches of research norms and standards. And I can talk a bit about that in the next slide. But in our policy itself and in the procedure, Stellenbosch has defined very clearly what are considered breaches of research norms at Stellenbosch University. And you'll see that fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism obviously do appear as the sort of research misconduct element of this, and the rest would fall into that category of questionable research practices that we discussed earlier. We have an official procedure which begins with the reception of a formal complaint in writing to the Research Integrity Officer. I do want to mention, though, that this is generally the last resort, because once you escalate a complaint through the central complaint process, it can transform a small dispute into something that's far more sinister. And in general, much more can be achieved prior to that at the departmental or faculty level. In general, the key factor is communication with all parties. But we are here to advise, discuss, and find a way through to resolution. And if a complaint or an area of concern does require escalation, the process has a very set format or procedure, which includes protecting identity, the appointment of a formal investigation committee of senior academics, who then investigate the matter and produce a report with recommendations. And that report is final and enacted through the Vice Rector for Research. So, I wanted to say, just get in touch with us. I've provided you the link to our landing page. And if you're looking for information about research integrity and ethics, or how to get hold of us, you can link to each of the research ethics committees from this page, as well as find access to all our key ethics personnel if you want to have a chat with us. And just to say that we're here to help. So if there's any questions about the ethical design of your protocol, or you have questions about responsible conduct of research in general, contact us. I've put my own email address there, as well as the two ethics email addresses that apply to the different offices. And I think that is where I wanted to really end the half hour of an overview information, and maybe just talk you through what we've got on offer, sort of sneak preview of what's to come in our research ethics series. We had our session today, which was an overview, and on the 17th of February, we will have a focused session on the animal care and use program. So we are very happy that Prof. Dr. Barsdorf, who's the chair of our Research Ethics Committee for Animal Care and Use, will be speaking on the 4 R's and 5 freedoms, and telling us what we need to know about animal research, teaching and testing at the university. We're also really honored to have Dr. Esty Spies, who's the Director of Animal Research Facilities and an experimental animal vet. And she will be talking to us about the animal facilities at Stellenbosch University, as well as the requirements of the South African Veterinary Council. And this will be followed by a session on the committee and application process for the Animal Care and Use Ethics Committee by Mr. Winston Bucas, who is the coordinator for this committee. We then have another session on the 24th of February on the Biological Environmental Safety Program. And we're really honored to have Prof. Samantha Sampson, who's the chair of our Research Ethics Committee for Biological Environmental Safety, who will talk to us about the principles, accepted standards, and benchmarks for biological environmental safety at the institution. And then to talk to us again through the committee and application process, Mr. Winston Bucas, who also coordinates the Biological and Environmental Safety Committee. And then finally, on the 3rd of March will be our third and final session on research involving human participants. We'll have one session on principles and benchmarks for research with humans. And we're very grateful to Prof. Anita van der Merwe, who's the chair of the Health Research Ethics Committee 2, and Prof. Ilana van Wyk, who chairs the Research Ethics Committee for Social, Behavioral and Education Research, who will talk to us about this. And this will be followed by 3 short sessions on committee and application processes by Dr. Blanche Pretorius, or a delegate for HREC, by Dr. Debbie Murray, who's the head of our undergraduate office for UREC, and Mrs. Clarissa Robertson for the Social, Behavioral and Educational Ethics Committee. So we do hope you join us for the series, or for at least the pieces of the series that are relevant to the research that you're doing. We've structured them in a way where there's presentations, but there's also a lot of time afterwards for discussion and questions. So we hope that if you are busy developing research protocols, or you're thinking about doing research in these areas, that you will join us and be able to raise questions that you have, or listen into the discussions in order to help you find the right resources that you might need. So thank you for your time. And I thought, we've got a lot of time left over. We can use it, or there might be a bonus that you've got some extra time on your calendar, but there is space now for us to chat about research integrity and the responsible conduct of research. And I have seen that many of our ethics colleagues are also on the call, so they are around, and I'm welcoming questions and discussion, and hopefully we can have a nice chat. Thank you. Ah. I think I see a hand raised by Dr. Karen Duprier. Please go ahead.
Hi, Nicola. Thank you for a really great presentation. I think I've got sort of one comment and then just a question.
Yeah.
So when you were talking earlier about the students often sort of being identified in investigations, I think what's important is that as we transition also more to a supervisor and mentor level, it's important to give academic supervision. I think we're very comfortable with that, but it's not always so easy to do. So also do supervision in terms of responsible conduct of research. And I think that's where the gap sometimes is, that we sort of focus just on the academic part and we forget that they don't always have all the bricks or know exactly, how to get to that point when we do data collection. How can we sort of better support them, especially at a student level, to actually do responsible conduct of research?
Yeah.
So myself and two other colleagues actually career development awards. We hold career development awards from the NIH, and one of the things that we've been really talking about is they actually have a whole list of things that they want us to do in the 5-year period of the grant in terms of responsible conduct of research. And I think if you're willing, it might be nice to just have a conversation with you at some point where we actually show you their requirements and think of things that I don't often see in sort of lectures that's hosted in terms of, I've got it open here, like collaborative research, including with industry and sort of things like that. That's not always covered, but I wanted to know if you would be keen to maybe just also talk to us and see what can we put in place that's still missing. That would
Absolutely.
be.
So please do see us as a resource for that, and you're welcome to get in touch with me over email and we can set up a MS Teams meet and talk through it and see how we can support you. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
I'm gonna try and keep track of the hands. Can't really see all the participants on the side here. Hang on, Prof. Sampson.
Yeah, hi Nicola. Sorry,
Hi.
I think it is only my hand up at the moment. And it went up as Karen was asking her question, because I think you'll recall an email from me asking a similar thing a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So Karen, I'd love to be part of that discussion, because we're facing a similar we have a similar question at the moment, is how to do this in a way that's not duplicating effort all over the institution. So I would really like to be part of that conversation as well. I'm going to maybe ask a bit of a devil's advocate question, Nicola. So I know, I mean, we particularly face this issue with people who have to apply, in some cases, to HREC, to REC-BASE, and to REC-ACU for the same project.
Yeah.
And researchers get a little annoyed by this, which is probably understandable because it is quite a lot of admin. And we try our best to support them in this, but I just wonder if you've had any thoughts about that. Are there ways in which we can try to streamline the process a bit more? How can we better support them? Because I think, that's quite a hurdle for people to get over.
Yeah. I know, Sam, we have a resource on our website. I think it probably would have been helpful for me to include that, but maybe we can include it in one of the upcoming sessions that helps. It's a sort of one-page information leaflet that helps researchers figure out which committees they may need to go to in order to apply for the research. And sort of we were hoping that infographic, and I think if I remember correctly, you might have even helped us to develop that. But so thank you. But yeah, this is the only kind of resource that we can offer in terms of documentary sort of paperwork that someone can look at. But I would encourage people to get in touch with our office. So, all of our ethics officers are very experienced. Some of them have masters or PhDs in ethics or are busy doing that. So their level of technical skill and experience at the institution is really high. We're really blessed with that. And so I think, you know, the primary message is just reach out to one of the ethics coordinators or to myself. If you're thinking of doing a project where you know it's going to involve, or you think it might involve more than two of these ethics committees or more than one of these ethics committees, because if you can start to do these things in parallel, it saves you a lot of time, and we can advise you on that from the ethics office side, rather than, you know, sort of jumping through hoops in a you know, one after the other. I don't know if that's where you were going, Sam, or whether you wanted me to talk about some other aspect of this. I'm happy to adjust.
No, that's fine. I mean, I think there's just a certain amount of paperwork that people have to do. But like you say, if they discuss it beforehand, we can maybe help to make it a little bit more streamlined in how they tackle it, you know, if they can do things in parallel, for example. So thanks.
Look, we also know our biological environmental safety committee is relatively new, incredibly established and doing incredibly well, but relatively new. And I think as we move forward and more laboratories are registered under this and more projects are coming in there, we may find ways to sort of streamline through cross-referencing the various applications. And I think we've already got some text in there that sort of, you know, can red flag or flag something for a researcher to say, oh, we should be also doing this application. But I think as we work through those, we'll see more opportunities to put more bits in that could flag things earlier for people. Prof. Gorgens? Right, sorry, I hope I'm not pronouncing it incorrectly.
No worries. It's always interesting.
Please go ahead.
Surname. So I just want to ask a question. So I am a desk coordinator for our department, which is industrial psychology.
Yes.
And so we have quite a lot of low risk research coming through, but there has been a movement because we do a lot of studies on burnout, something that could potentially cause psychological trauma when people reflect, you know, on levels of, you know, the psychological levels of these variables. Now, the procedure up to now was that the moment it is flagged as medium risk, I would go into the system and immediately forward it to REC because it needed to be reviewed by REC and yeah. So either medium or high risk. But it seems like the process has changed now because I tried to forward something and then it asked me to actually review the application. So apologies if I missed that communication. I did speak to Professor about that, but
Yeah.
maybe on a high level, can you just speak about that? Because the thing is just that you know, we already review a lot of the applications as, you know, a low risk application. And that in a sense, you know, now even more, you know, sort of puts more stress on our committee because now we were required to also review all the medium risk things before it goes through to REC.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, you know, about that change. It's, yeah, we're a small committee, and you know, it's going to increase my workload significantly.
Yeah, I mean, I hope Malene's still on the line because maybe she can add some inputs to this. We're crossing over, and so there may be some overlap or some gaps. But I guess in general, if I have to think about this just off the top of my head logistically, is the REC itself, which is reviewing the high risk research and as far as I understood, the medium risk research, is one group of people that's got to review all the social, behavioral, and educational research that comes from all our faculties and schools and centers. And so I guess, you know, the reason it was we're able to separate it out by risk is that our national guidance allows us to do certain things in certain ways. And if a project is what's defined in our National Department of Health guidance, minimal risk, it gets subjected to a much sort of less onerous review process. And as soon as it gets bumped up into the more than minimal risk category, and I think it's different for SPE because you have low, medium, and high, then it has to have a more onerous review process where there's more reviewers, the whole committee voting, etc., etc. And I think if we look at the numbers, and again, I'm going to ask Malene or if Clarissa's here to comment, but if we look at the numbers that our actual REC is already handling on a monthly basis, it's phenomenal. And so I guess the idea with this is just to try and, for one, decentralize a bit so that the numbers are not all sitting with one central committee. But also, I see Clarissa, so she might add and correct me in places here, and I'm grateful for that. But also, the idea with decentralizing is we recognize that the expertise lies within a certain environment. You're very familiar with that kind of research. You're familiar with, you're an expert in that particular area. You are the best placed persons, the experts, so to speak, who are able to identify risk in a way better way than someone who's sitting on the Central Ethics Committee who may have very little to no experience in your particular environment. So I don't know if that helps clarify things a bit, and I'm going to just ask Clarissa to please unmute herself and add to it, because I think that might help.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicola. Sorry, I just wanted to check. Are you able to hear me? Just a thumbs up would be.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, so there have been changes on this on a system or technical level in terms of how we process the desk application. So as Nicola mentioned, from the SPE side, so I apologize to the other researchers who don't submit to the SPE, but we have categories such as low, medium, and high risk. And essentially on a technical side, what we try to do is streamline the process a bit more, whereby depending on the risk level that a desk coordinator would select, the system would send out a communication to the applicant. So when the desk coordinator assesses it as low, medium, or high risk, whatever the case may be, when they click that button, a communication is sent out to the applicant saying that the desk has assessed your project as low, medium, or high risk, and these are the next steps. So it does look like as if you now, yes, we've gotten some great feedback, so thank you, Lauren. But for desks who have been dealing with this on a more paper-based level, that have been doing reports on offline, it might seem as in now it's a way that you have to complete a full desk report, you have to do the review, but the system still allows you to bypass that. So I think, Prof. Gergens, I recall that I sent you an email in this regard, but if anything was unclear, I would be happy to just sit with you again and just to explain what the changes were that we made on a technical side and where there are perhaps gaps or something that's not clear that I can amend those sections on the form or the system.
Yes,
I hope
you.
that answers the question. Thank you.
It does. I think I was just more concerned about the fact that desks do a lot of the work, already, and that, that it would seem that our workload was now going to increase even more, and from department to department. But yeah, in our department there has been an increase in medium risk applications because there's been a lot of sort of hesitancy when it comes to certain fields like well-being and job insecurity, and these are things that we regularly work on. So yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm concerned about the workload increase on desk side, given that we already review a lot of the low risk. We review all the low risk applications.
Thank you, Prof. Gergens. But I assure you that medium, the the agreement is still medium and high risk research that is reviewed by the central REC, and the desks have the delegated authority to grant provisional approval for low risk research. So I think we maybe just need to have a conversation on the technical steps so that I can explain how this would work with the new changes. Yeah, but no changes in the original setup or workflow.
Thanks so much, Clarissa, for clarifying that for us. Do you have a new hand up, Prof, or is that just the hand that you were talking to now? Ah. Okay. Dr. Peterson, you're welcome to unmute.
Thanks. It's Mr. So you can just call me Jeremiah. Thanks so much for this session. So I'm in the library space, and I manage the learning and training activities within the library. Because of this, when we do our evaluations, it comes to me, and so I've got access to lots of anonymized data that can be used for publication. My question is, so around the usual research process, one would set up instruments and take it through ethics, and the approach is a lot more systematic. In this case, the data is there, and I was just wondering if this kind of data can be used for publication, or if it should go through some process, ethics process, before I make use of it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, in general, we would, so as soon as you move, I'm assuming you collected the information for institutional purposes. So it was collected, that data was collected for another purpose and not for research purposes. Is that right, Jeremiah?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So the legislation and the regulations in our country work around purpose. And so, you know, you may have all the permissions to collect that data and store it in various formats for institutional purposes or clinical purposes, or, you know, whatever the purpose is that you use that data in its original form for. And then there's a different, obviously, set of rules and guidelines that apply to using that even exact same data for research purposes. So there's two routes, I guess, but I think the important thing to remember is that our ethics committees cannot grant retrospective approval for any kind of research. And as soon as you start to take data that was previously confidential, you know, even if it's anonymized, as soon as you want to take that and use it in a publication, it changes the nature or the understanding of what that data is to become research, because you're now making it public. You're taking what was previously just institutionally specific information and making it public. And that's where the review is required, because we want some sort of level of review according to our legislation and our guidance to say, are we using, what kind of analysis are you doing on this data? What questions are you asking of the data? Are these questions and analysis appropriate methodologically or scientifically valid? And all of those things. So either way, you would have to either apply at the beginning to the ethics committee to say, you know, we're collecting this data, can we also keep it for research purposes and use it, but along with the proposal of what you are planning to do with that data in order to publish it. Or you can, if the data was already collected, let's just say you've got data that was collected sort of 10 years ago and you had no intention of using it for this, but now you've sort of looked back at that data and you think, sure, that would be really informative or sort of key things to share with a public audience. And that data is now completely anonymized and aggregated, so that there's no way that you can sort of trace back or go back and find out any private information about those individuals. You can then apply to the ethics committee to use that existing data, but it still has to go through a process of review where they're going to look at what the data looks like, what format you receive it in, and to what purpose you're going to use it in order to publish, so that they can again look at the standards, the quality, scientific validity, etc., etc. Does that make sense, Jeremiah, or do you need me to clarify anything further?
No, that makes perfect sense. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. I don't see any other hands, but just to say welcome. You're welcome to ask questions if you want to. I haven't checked the chat. If you want to type some, here's another one in the chat. Thank you for the informative presentation. I'm not sure if this is the correct platform, but I'm based at the Division of Medical Physiology, and we screen the HRIC and ACU prior to submission to the ethics committees. We recently noticed that HRIC applications don't distinguish between clinical sample collection versus laboratory after collection, therefore do not require OHS documentation. Sam, are you putting your hand up to answer this question for us?
I'm redirecting the question, Nicola. So hi, Marguerite. I was just typing a response. The best thing I would suggest is if you could drop an email to Winston with a little bit more information on the samples and what you're doing with them, because that can help us to make a recommendation on how to proceed. It might be that we do a waiver of approval, but we really need more information before we can judge that. Just one comment, and this is something that I've seen people get confused about in the past. So we have, there's occupational health and safety, which we deal, for example, with chemical hazards in the environment, which is actually not part of the REC-BEST remit. REC-BEST will deal with anything that is a biological hazard, so pathogens that require biosafety level 2 and above, things that have GMOs and nanomaterials. But it's really best for each project to get in touch, and I think we're pretty responsive, and so we would be able to guide people with a bit more information, but best to just contact Winston.
Winston, did you have your hand up to add?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Yes, I had, but I quickly put it down after Samantha touched on the occupational health and safety aspect that I wanted to clarify. Thank you, Chair, for putting that to us.
Thanks, Winston. I don't see any other hands. Happy to take more questions or to facilitate more discussion. But if that's the end, then I'm also happy to bid you all farewell and thank you for attending the presentation. And I hope that you'll join us for the future series of presentations that are upcoming over the next month.